You know, I'm going to give you a history lesson.
We got some dumbass motherfuckers floating around this country.
Stop laughing! And when I do, start fucking.
Also, y'all did some nasty-ass jokes on my ass, too.
Funny jokes and unfunny jokes come out of the same birth.
You fucking guys are unbelievable.
Why are you laughing?
Evening, everybody. Welcome back once again to Why Are You Laughing? A History of Comedy podcast at the Vaulted Podcast Studios in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Today, I'm pleased to introduce you to the great Phil Hartman. Very underrated Phil Hartman. And the gang's all here to talk about him. And welcome back, boys. How are we?
Good. How are you?
You know, the last episode that you guys listened to, I'm guessing, is Sam Kinison, and it kind of, grinded to a halt, had sort of a sad ending. But today, luckily, we talk about a much happier tale that ends in just a real, another light topic here on Why Are You Laughing? But Phil Hartman, truly, I believe, is one of the most underrated guys ever in comedy, and I don't know that I ever really realized, like, he was one of my favorite guys when I was a kid. I loved watching him, but I don't know that I ever realized this until going back and doing some research on him. Guys like Phil Hartman were an inspiration to a generation of weird-voiced social outcasts like myself. Like, people who just talked in an odd cadence could look up to Phil Hartman and be like, well, maybe I could be like that guy someday. And I'm not, but I'm still dreaming.
Make the money, marry the love of my life.
Yeah, well, hopefully it ends the same for me as well.
We all hope so, too.
Phil Hartman, actually, as a child, said he kind of was filling a hole. Basically, he felt like he didn't get enough love. Oh, God. It's another one we're not going to be able to get through, huh? Well, Phil Hartman, as a boy, said, like, in his home. I don't know if he was, like, totally neglected by his parents. I didn't really find a lot on it, but I did find that quote that made me think of kind of his love life, which will be a theme throughout today's podcast. It's not just the one you're thinking of. There's multiple layers to this story. But I want to start as far as, his role in comedy. And one very strange thing that I found, because, like, looking at and listening to the guy, I wouldn't have thought this. But Phil Hartman dropped out of college to become a roadie for different bands for a couple of years, and then also made some album covers. I don't know these bands. Coco is one of them. And either American or the Americans or something like that. I don't know if those ring a bell to anyone. No. But those are two of the more prominent ones. But he toured with this band as a roadie, which he does not seem like that kind of guy.
Not at all.
Right?
He seems like a nerd.
He seems like a very straight-laced, uptight kind of guy. But apparently not. He was a young rebel who was touring with bands around the country. And then like I said, he designed those album covers and liked graphic design so much that he went back to school for graphic design and then started a career as a graphic design artist, which actually, like, if you look at Phil Hartman and just listen to him talk, that seems more right. Like, he does seem like the perfect, like, the funny guy at the office in graphic design. Like, that does suit him. Yeah. And apparently he made decent money in graphic design. But, like, they would say that, like, all day he would make these, like, different cartoon characters. And, like, he said that, like, kind of in his mind, he would just voice them, like, give them different voices and things. And he kind of started to realize that, like, he needed a creative outlet. Like, the world of graphic design wasn't doing it for him. So he started going to Groundlings shows. And this is when, you familiar with the Groundlings at all?
Yes. Yeah.
It's basically like UCB, but
it's like the SNL Chicago farm system, more or less.
California, I think.
Oh.
Groundlings
is Chicago.
Which one did start in Chicago?
I thought that was Groundlings.
I think you're right, but this was in California. So I don't know if there was a California branch of some kind. Yeah, once you said that, I was like, yeah, I thought they were in Chicago too. But he was based in California, I believe. We'll have to look more into that.
That sounds right, though.
Right?
California, but who knows?
If you can, Matt, find that while we're talking, just because I don't want to get that wrong. But he started just like going to Groundling shows and kind of getting a feel for it. And I guess, at least legend has it, that it is LA, right? Yeah, I thought so.
Second City.
Second City.
Oh, Second
yes.
City. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
That
yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, yeah. And that's the one that like Tina Fey and people started.
Right.
The Groundlings is Kristen Wiig, Will Ferrell,
Yes.
other people. But yes, so that was in LA. Thank God, I'm not losing my mind. But Phil Hartman would go to shows, and one night in 1975, he just felt like he could do it and just hopped on stage, I guess. At least legend has it. So he started he joined the Groundlings. And they had kind of like tiers. Like I think he started like in the second tier, I guess. But pretty rapidly, they could tell he was a talented guy and was kind of like one of the forefathers of the Groundlings. Like I said, he wasn't one of the founders, but he was one of the very early guys. And then he was shortly after joined by two people he was ended up being very close with, John Lovitz and Paul Rubens, who we know as Pee Wee Herman, which we'll get to. But am I jumping ahead at all, Matt, or am I on the right track here?
He is among the bands he did logos for. He also did one for Crosby,
right.
Stills, and Nash.
That's
so
pretty cool.
he did the logo, not the album cover, but he did the logo for Crosby, Stills, and Nash. And for whatever reason, he was never given credit for that. And then in interviews later, like he said he was not bothered by it. Like he actually found it kind of funny. Like he thought it was cool that he could say that he did their logo and never got credit for it. I always wonder if it was when Neil Young got to the band and he said, this guy's going to work with a Joe Rogan. Now, let me tell you, Joe Rogan, you don't know yet, but I swear. So yeah, that is funny that he evidently does. Next time you look at Crosby, Stills, and Nash's logo, which I know a lot of you kids do often, think of Phil Hartman. So where are we going next, Matt?
His first TV appearance?
Yes.
Oh yeah. So this is where again
In 78.
I'll briefly mention that before that, while he was in graphic design, he was married briefly. So just keep that in mind. And then divorced, which we'll talk a little more about later. But then, technically his first TV appearance. This was not his first acting role or anything like that. But he did make it onto The Dating Game in 1978. And I guess he won. Like, he was one of the contestants. And he won. The girl picked him. And then he got stood up on the date. Like, he actually wanted to go on the date, and the girl never showed up. So, again, heartbreak for Phil Hartman, who is, I don't know. He's not a bad-looking guy, right? He seems like kind of a handsome...
He's got like little boy hair.
Handsome fella. But maybe just a weirdo. I don't know. Never didn't seem to have a lot of luck with the ladies. He was troubled by it.
He doesn't pick them very well.
No, it's extreme bad luck with the ladies.
Yes, he certainly did.
Little boy hair is an option on a priest dating app.
Is that right?
Must have now.
Yes, there's a priest dating app, Mike.
You don't say. All right, so what's next?
His first marriage.
Let's talk about it a little. Tell me a little about it.
So it only lasted 2 years, and his second lasted 3, ending in 1985.
Yeah. So Phil was the kind of guy, and I can relate to this a little bit, that fell in love. And from my personal experience, the personality type seems like, when you don't have a lot of success relationship-wise, the second you have a modicum of success, like, and a girl shows you any attention, you're like, well, this is the love of my life now. So I think Phil had a little bit of that.
Yeah.
As we'll continue to find out. But yeah, another guy. How many comedians are we going to talk about? Failed marriages, multiple I never understand guys that get divorced that quickly and are like, let me hop back into it. I feel like I could do it again,
The universe sending him every sign possible.
Yeah.
His dating show girl stood him up. His first 2 marriages didn't last.
A great deal of foreshadowing in Phil Hartman's life.
If only he met Louis Anderson.
And would have changed his world.
Yeah.
And then Lorne Michaels came to a Groundling show.
Yeah, so Lorne Michaels traveled all the way out to Chicago for the Groundlings. I'm kidding.
You dick.
So he showed up, and everyone at the Groundlings assumed he was there for Phil Hartman, and it turned out he actually had no interest in Phil Hartman, and I'll just say, Lorne Michaels had a lot of success in this business, but he wasn't always spot on because he was there to see John Lovitz instead of Phil Hartman. So, and that's how John Lovitz got on the show.
Little Nicky's John Lovitz?
Yes, that's right. And Phil Hartman was devastated by that, and he was not having a lot of success in the business. And he was contemplating getting back into graphic design. But like I said, he worked with Lovitz and Paul Rubens at the Groundlings, and him and Paul Rubens worked on this Pee Wee Herman character. And they kind of came up with the character together, and Phil Hartman ended up creating the Captain Clark, I forget the guy's name, Captain Clark or something like that.
Oh.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, the character on Pee Wee Herman's show, and he had a lot to do. Like they started writing for these characters together, and then through a lot of lack of success, Phil contemplated getting back into graphic design when HBO called and was the first thing they got, the TV show, I believe, the HBO TV show. Pee Wee's Playhouse. That started to take off a little bit, and that saved Phil from quitting the business. And they worked on that for a good amount of time together, and Pee Wee got very successful and ended up hosting SNL.
Right.
But so there's something interesting. I learned this through the Phil Hartman research I was doing, because I knew that in the 80s SNL hit a snag where they were not very successful and they were always on the verge of cancellation.
Yeah.
But I didn't know exactly how it played out, and I found this very interesting. That in order to like boost ratings, I guess, to bring in like a younger audience or something, they asked Pee Wee Herman to host SNL in the, I want to say, 10th season or 11th season, whatever year that was. And so Pee Wee agrees to do it, but he says, I want my writers. And this was at a time where like SNL had never done that before, and it hasn't really done it since. In fact, that's something Stern talks about a lot. Like he was always like, I'll host SNL, but it would have to be with Fred and Jackie writing for me. Like I wouldn't want SNL's writers, and they never obliged. However, I guess SNL was so down on their luck at this time that they just said, whatever you want. Well, you can have your writers. And so, Pee Wee brings the staff over, and the one they noticed most of all was Phil Hartman. And that's when Lorne Michaels started to take a shine to him and realize maybe there's more to this. Maybe I missed something with this guy. And I guess Phil did a great job that week, kind of standing out in the writing process.
Cool.
So some time goes by with old Pee Wee, and he gets a big movie, Pee Wee's Big Adventure.
Which Hartman wrote
with Paul Rubens, and that was very successful. That kind of launched Pee Wee into, I guess, what we know today, if you can say that. His star is flamed out a little bit, but he was very big back in the day. And so now we get to a weird time in their relationship, because there are a few things that play. Is the next thing the clip with Stern?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's play that first, and then I'll get into a little more about the relationship between Phil Hartman and Paul Rubens.
In truth, I've spoken with him a few times since the incident, and what
Pause
happened
1
was
second.
I did the cost.
The incident they're referring to is Paul Rubens was jerking off in an adult movie theater. And could you believe it? Stern asked him about it. I couldn't believe it.
Show, and Costas asked me about Paul Rubens, and it wasn't in our pre-interview, and I spoke about him, and Paul called me, and we had been estranged for really since I started Saturday Night Live.
Estranged?
Yeah, just not talking. Really.
For any particular reason? You're at odds with him, aren't you?
Yeah.
Why? Because you felt you helped develop the Pee Wee Playhouse and you never received credit or money for it. Is that correct?
Well, that's part of it, yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
You were one of the creators of that.
Yes.
And Pee Wee took that show, took it to CBS, made a lot of money off it, and you felt that, hey, wait a second, where am I in this?
Well, all of us who created the original stage show that was an HBO special. It played at the Roxy Theater in the summer of '81. We had a contract that said that we get 3% of whatever happens with this show.
Right.
And then I went on and I co-wrote Pee Wee's Big Adventure with Paul, and I worked with him on that. A
huge movie.
Yeah. And then he decided to do the TV show, and all of us were
out.
And
you certainly were a creator of all of this.
Yes, I created the Captain Carl character. I wrote a lot of the scenes.
And you called him probably and said, hey, Pee Wee, what's the deal? Paul, what's the deal?
Yeah, so Phil went on to say, and this is something that is so it's a lot of comedians have this trait. We talked a lot about it with the Stooges, probably most notably. But Phil says, like, Howard asks, like, why didn't you guys call him out on this? He's like, really, no one called him. I didn't talk to him. None of the writers talked to him. They were, kind of afraid of confrontation, which you find a lot in comedy. And the reason people's careers don't advance a lot is because they're afraid to speak up for themselves. And there's a lot of that in comedy.
It seemed pretty cut and dry. 3% of everything that became of the special that was on HBO. So it wouldn't even have been like...
Right. It seems fairly easy, but even Phil in this interview says that, like, other people tried to get their money. So it's not that, like, no one tried. So legally, I don't know how binding that contract was. Yeah, like they could have had a handshake agreement of some kind. I have no idea.
I do love Howard's interview style, and he's like, he asks him a question, he's like, no.
He answers it for him.
And then he just dumps his own thoughts of what he thinks it is on him.
Very leading questions,
which is how Howard has always done it. Which is, to be fair, like a good way to get people to kind of just confess some.
Well, because then they'll be like, no, that's too much. Here's what it actually is. And they actually end up saying
he'd be objected to a lot of times in a courtroom with those questions.
Yeah, right.
Leading the witness.
So there's a little more to that than Phil let on. And I also question whether or not he actually did talk to him. He kind of alluded that he and Paul Rubens had patched things up a little bit, but I'd also seen where, like, they stopped talking to each other completely, like they were estranged until Hartman's death. I'm not really sure which is true. Maybe they spoke at some point, but they were never really very close. So some of the resentment also stems from, like we talked about, Phil Hartman was integral in creating the Pee Wee Herman character. He said Captain Carl was the character's name. I had it wrong. Yeah. But he created that character, which was a big part of, Pee Wee's Playhouse and all that. Excuse me. And, I don't think... So the advice that Phil gave Pee Wee Herman was, listen, you're going to get typecast and pigeonholed into either this specific character or this type of character if you keep doing that. And Pee Wee said, hey, why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Why not keep, continue on just doing the character forever? And they got into a kind of a disagreement about that. So I think it was a multitude of things. And frankly, it's really hard to say if Pee Wee Herman got pigeonholed as that character, considering I refer to him as Pee Wee Herman.
So did Howard Stern just did too. Yeah. He goes, Pee Wee. I mean, Paul.
Yeah. So home run Phil on that one. I think Phil would have had a good career in management as well, apparently.
Yeah. Well, he looked the part.
He certainly did. Yeah. Well, that's, to kind of take a break quickly just to talk about Phil's career in general, is a couple things I noticed is that clearly, I think, influences of his would be guys, and that's why, spoiler, what ultimately happened to Phil is even more of a tragedy because I look at a guy like Phil Hartman and I compare him to, I think of like Fred Willard, Eugene Levy, Martin Mull, that sort of very dry humor. Where it almost feels like they're, saying something very serious, but they're completely making people laugh.
Just being silly.
Yeah, and just that kind of that old white man sort of shit.
Yeah.
Like, I think Phil would have been great at that. He was almost made to be an old man.
70s newscaster voice.
Yes. Yeah.
I was actually thinking that. I was like, can you imagine, like, growing up, like, being, like, his or like Casey Kasem's dad, sitting there like making breakfast, like, "Hey, Dad, can I have some eggs? How are you?" Like, it's like, oh my god, this fucking kid.
So he was, and I mean, the best sign of that is he didn't get SNL until he was in his 40s, I think. So legitimately, I think he was kind of made to be an older guy.
And NewsRadio, he was the newscaster on that show too, yeah.
And and so like we talk about revisionist history, things I wish they'd done or wish they'd been able to do in this case. And I've always thought this. Jesus, we're telling a story here.
Spoiler alert.
I was a big fan of the show Community.
Yeah, me too.
That show is pretty much run into the ground by Chevy Chase.
Yeah,
because of Chevy Chase, they got rid of Dan Harmon in season 4, which was the worst season. And then the next season, Donald Glover left. They brought Dan Harmon back, but it wasn't the same. So that show, I think Community was a very good show that kind of got ruined by Chevy Chase. Yeah. And I think Phil Hartman in that role would have been perfect.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's the type of role that Phil Hartman would be. Or even maybe just Chevy Chase is kind of an influence that I'm thinking of because you put Phil Hartman in movies like the vacation movies. you could see him in something like that. Like, I think there was a lot more that Phil Hartman could have done, and that he wasn't able to do, but also like, you know, while he was alive, his business, the business never saw him as that for whatever reason. Yeah.
I always think of Phil Hartman as more silly than like, because Chevy Chase is like that real like deadpan like seriousness, but like makes you laugh. But like, I always thought of Phil Hartman as more like a silly person.
But I could
like a
see
goofy
him,
dad.
Exactly,
you know?
But I could see him playing that straight in a way that Chevy Chase didn't, where Phil Hartman is saying, you know, racist shit, but legitimately doesn't know that he's saying it.
That's the stuff
like Fred Willard.
But see, that's the stuff that I was like, I couldn't see Phil Hartman doing.
Oh, really?
It's like the racist jokes that Chevy Chase says, because like Chevy Chase is like he's almost abrasive.
Yeah.
In his way, but like Phil Hartman's got that voice, and you're like, hey, like I don't know if
he's a funny Staples manager.
Yeah, like I don't know.
See, I think that I take it as there's a charm to him that he could have pulled that off almost easier than Chevy Chase.
I think you might be right, but I just don't. I'm not picturing it like you are. I guess.
But yeah, that's just a tangent. Yeah. We'll never know. But that I do think a lot of those guys when I watch Phil Hartman is like the Eugene Levy's and Fred Willards.
Absolutely, Martin Mull.
I always picture him in Jingle All the Way as Ted.
Yeah, Ted,
the neighbor Ted.
And he's I haven't seen that movie since I was a kid. But he's so great in that. Like my memory, at least, is of him being so great in that as like the scumbag. Like this guy is moving into my wife. And how does she not see it? Like, you know.
There's like, cookies.
Yeah, like that when he picks up the phone at Arnold's house. And it's great.
Yeah.
And then as soon as he hangs it up, it's like, pipe down in there, like yelling at the kids.
Yeah. So, you know, Phil and Paul Rubens have their big feud. Which kind of led to Phil saying, all right, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to try and get on SNL. And now that Lorne Michaels has seen the real Phil Hartman, he gets on SNL in 86, I think. And so here's the interesting thing I learned about Saturday Night Live is that the season prior, again, I forget if it's 10 or 11, but whichever one it was an absolute disaster. One of the, at least at that time, the worst season in SNL history.
Is that when they had like Robert Downey Jr. and like
I believe
Anthony
so.
Michael Hall?
Yes.
And like,
yeah. I believe so. So it was a disaster. I think Gilbert might have been in that cast too, or maybe that was earlier.
Like
that might have been earlier.
Penn and Teller were on the cast at that point and stuff.
I thought they hosted.
No, they were cast members, but
really?
Like ancillary cast members for a little while.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they didn't just host; they were like part of. They were like ancillary cast.
Yeah. Well, so they said Lorne went back to, this is the season he went back to like finding talent rather than trying to get people who are famous.
Right. Yeah.
So Phil Hartman, Dana Carvey. I'd say Phil Hartman and Dana Carvey.
Fuck yeah.
And then, you know, John Lovitz and a couple other people. But I'd say Phil Hartman and Dana Carvey are pretty much solely responsible for saving SNL because this season SNL had been canceled. They basically canceled it, and then Lorne Michaels went to NBC and just begged and pleaded and said, "Give me one more. I will prove it to you. Give me one more season, and then you can judge us based on that." And that's when they brought in Phil Hartman and Dana Carvey, and it was so good that, you know, obviously they're still doing it today, 35 years later, whatever it is.
And that's one of the like iconic casts too. That's when like Mike Myers came on.
Yeah,
was Julia Louis-Dreyfus?
I think she was before. I think she was before. I think she might have been part of that bad. Yeah.
Which is insane if you read that cast off.
She would have fit in really great in like later on with those guys too.
Martin Short too, I think.
Yeah. Martin Short.
I don't know. I feel like we're conflating seasons.
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
But regardless, Phil Hartman and Dana Carvey, and you had guys. I think the big thing that saved and kind of changed SNL was that at the time you had guys playing such relevant characters like Dana Carvey doing Carson in his the final years of the Tonight Show, and Hartman playing Reagan and then Clinton, and Carvey playing George Bush. Like having those guys do that, like mock the biggest people in the world. Yeah. That's a big thing, and obviously, I mean, look at what SNL's become. That's all they do now.
Yeah.
Well, try to. I don't know. I don't even know what it is anymore. But
mock. They don't mock shit.
But yeah. So around this time, Phil Hartman gets on SNL. He saves it. He's the hero. And around that time, 86, is when he meets a woman named Bryn Amdahl.
Dun dun
I
dun.
think his last name. And they very quickly got married. I think they were married within a year of meeting each other. So again, Phil, you're rushing into love. What are you doing, Phil? Come on. But they fell in love. They fell head over heels for each other. And then a few years later had their first son. And by 1992, they had 2 kids. So Phil is in the middle of marital bliss. He's entering, the peak of his career. He's on SNL. Everything's going very well. And then where are we, Matt? I don't want to miss anything here before we get into the nitty gritty.
Well, he got on SNL. He also, at the same time, turned down Jay Leno's
That's right.
opportunity.
So I never knew this. I guess Leno offered him. So Phil Hartman had been successful for a few years now on Saturday Night Live. And then Phil was going to leave SNL. And they offered him first his own sketch show. It was going to be called The Phil Show. And then I think it was, that might have been after he left SNL. I think when he officially did leave SNL, he was offered The Phil Show. It was supposed to be just a sketch comedy show, and then NBC decided it's not worth it. Like sketch comedy. I don't know if it was going to be prime time, but whatever it wasn't worth it to produce sketch comedy. It was kind of phasing out other than SNL, or so they thought.
Yeah.
So that got scrapped. But also, Leno, when he took over The Tonight Show in 93, and that's kind of like peak Hartman on SNL, Leno went to Phil, offered him the sidekick. So Kevin Eubanks, you can thank Phil Hartman. And I'm very glad he didn't take that. Would have been a complete miscasting, I think.
Yes.
Because it would have been the only time in history where you have a sidekick who's funnier than the host of the show. And I don't even hate Jay Leno or anything, but it's just like, I think Phil Hartman is so talented, and I think Jay Leno is more of I'm not even saying he's an unfunny guy, but he's a pleaser.
He would have been funnier than Leno just by making faces that he does.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas Andy Richter and Ed McMahon, they're not Carson, they're not Conan.
Ed McMahon wasn't even a comedian.
He was like a game show host or something.
Star Search.
And oddly enough, Phil Hartman played a great Ed McMahon.
Yeah, it's true.
I went back and watched the sketch. So the Saturday that Carson ended The Tonight Show. Obviously, the cold open was Dana Carvey's Carson in the tux that Johnny wore on the last show. And Ed McMahon and Phil Hartman was just playing Ed McMahon shit-faced.
Yeah, that's right.
He's like, are you drunk, John? And Phil Hartman goes, you are correct, sir. So yes, thank God. I think that was another wise decision by Phil Hartman. This guy was good in Hollywood.
Professionally, great decisions.
Decisions.
Personally, terrible.
He was a pro. So yeah, he turns down Leno. He's not going to be the sidekick. And then he got NewsRadio in 94, 95, whenever he left SNL. And he said basically he loved the writing of NewsRadio. And he liked that it was an ensemble cast.
Yeah.
Kind of like we talked about Louis Anderson, and I said, I don't know that I could see Louis Anderson carrying a sitcom.
Right.
I don't know whether or not Phil Hartman could, but he at least said to himself, I'd rather be in an ensemble cast. Yeah. I don't know that I want to be the star, which I think is the right move. Now, NewsRadio never finished. I don't think it ever finished in the top 30 in the ratings. Like, they had abysmal ratings.
It was great, though.
Despite... They had Dave. I always kind of considered Dave Foley the star. Would you say
I did too. Yes, I agree with you. Because he was the one who had like the love interest.
Yeah.
But
it had Dave Foley, Phil Hartman, Stephen Root, who, if you don't know that name, great actor, and you've seen him in a ton of shit.
You know who he is.
Office Space, Dodgeball.
Yep.
He was in that show Barry. I mean, if you see him, you'll know who he is. He's been in a ton of things.
Milton Stapler guy from Office Space.
Yeah. Milton Wadhams.
Yep. He's Bill from King of the Hill, isn't he?
I don't think so.
The neighbor?
Is he?
The stapler guy? Yeah.
I have no idea.
Maybe.
I didn't know.
It's true.
I think
folks, we record these on the same day, and I think Craig's goal today was, let's bring every episode to a grinding halt.
We're talking about that
guy. I don't know. Is he? I have no idea.
Yeah.
No, but you're right. NewsRadio was a phenomenal cast.
Yeah, and
insane.
That's oddly enough. I mean, I brought up Community. Maybe Phil wanted to be in another failed show. Yeah. That was basically NewsRadio was basically the Community of the 90s.
Yeah.
where like it was always on the verge of getting canceled, but
it was a cult favorite.
Yeah, Andy Dick was in that show. A young Joe Rogan.
More foreshadowing.
Yeah. A crazy, talented, funny cast. But Phil Hartman also seems like the kind of guy, I don't know this, but maybe he appreciated being on more of a cult following type show than like the Seinfeld at that time or whatever. But regardless, we remember it today as a hit show.
Yeah.
But what do we have next, Matt?
Well, going back to his marriage, they had kids.
Hold on.
Well, no. We're not going.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, no.
I'm not going there yet.
Good.
So they got married, and then within a year, they had. Well, no, by 1992, they had 2 kids.
Yes.
And on the birth of the first kid, an ex-wife of Phil Hartman's, which there were many, sent him a letter congratulating congratulated him, and Bryn.
Yeah. So.
Planting some seeds.
Oh boy!
So this might have been the first sign.
Planted some red flags.
This might have been the first sign that all was not well. So Phil's ex-wife, evidently a nice enough lady, sent him a letter. Said, "Hey, congrats on the kid." And that whore really had it coming. So Bryn sent her a letter in response. She intercepted this letter. And, naturally, as we all kind of do, when you get a letter like that congratulating you on your first child, you respond with a multi-page letter littered with death threats. Said, like, I'd gouge your eyes out or something.
Obviously.
So that was the first sign that maybe the new Mrs. Hartman wasn't completely stable. And evidently... found years later. These apparently were never sent. The cast members did not get these. But she wrote multiple letters in the same vein to cast members of SNL, particularly, I want to say her name is Jan Hooks, who played Hillary Clinton at the time. So Phil Hartman masterfully played Bill Clinton, his best-known role on SNL.
Cheeseburger.
Yeah. Like he went to McDonald's, and he was very funny.
Great.
And anytime Hillary Clinton was in a sketch, Jan Hooks played Hillary Clinton. So Bryn, as all sane individuals do, said, "Oh, they're playing husband and wife on television. That whore has to die." But to her credit, she drafted the letter and never sent it. So I guess she had some sort of peace of mind.
I'm pretty sure that's a therapy tactic. Write what you feel, but then throw it in the trash.
That's true. So these were rational times for Bryn. So before we get more into Bryn, also, a thing that Phil Hartman is very well known for is The Simpsons at that time.
Oh, yeah.
Which he was supposed to be a one-off character, which is funny because his voice is so perfect.
So great.
I thought, so he was in 50 episodes.
Yeah.
The hilarious part of that is like, I think now that's like less than 1% of Simpsons episodes.
I know. Yeah.
So that just tells you how long that fucking thing has been on the air. But he sounds like a voice that was made for The Simpsons.
For The Simpsons.
But he was in 50 episodes. His favorite role was Troy McClure. B-list actor, yeah. Troy McClure. And, fun fact, evidently, a few years later, they were talking about adapting that character to like a live-action movie. Oh, my God. Like, basically, Phil Hartman would have played Troy McClure in a movie. It would have. My understanding is it would have had nothing to do with this. It would have been outside the Simpsons world, I think. But you would have seen Phil Hartman as this guy, Troy McClure.
Oh, like what they're doing with the new Buzz Lightyear movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
so he was thinking about it in like 97, 98. And I don't know what stopped that project, but I'm sure we'll get to it. So yeah, he loved characters like that. Like he had a character who was like a beaten down detective named I think it was Chip Hazard or something.
Chip Hazard.
Was it Chip Hazard?
It was Chip Hazard, I think, yeah.
And I watched his audition for SNL, which you can find on YouTube if you want to go find it. But that's what he started the audition with. Was the Chip Hazard character. And he seemed like a guy who loved like these just silly characters that he would create. Like I think everything I read said like his most famous character is Bill Clinton. I think Sinatra was probably his best character because he played Sinatra in a way, and this is what SNL is completely missing now. He played Sinatra in a way that like kind of lovingly mocked Sinatra.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It wasn't mean. It wasn't ruthless, but it did make fun of him.
It's hysterical.
You know what I mean? And I think that's what SNL is missing now, where they only mock people they hate now, it seems.
Yeah.
But, I don't know if Phil Hartman was a huge Sinatra fan, but I'm sure there was some level of respect.
It was so great. He played him extra angry.
Yeah. So Norm said it best he was talking about Alec Baldwin on SNL, and Norm said you cannot impersonate people you hate. Because then you're just angrily doing he goes, in fact, you kind of have to love the people you're impersonating because you see what's good about them that they think is a good quality about them, but is mockable in reality. Right. And so that's what I think Phil Hartman was also very good at, obviously. And Sandler called him the glue. I like. They explained, they're like, Adam Sandler called him the glue, or they said. Came from Sandler, and maybe I think Lauren might have referred to him as that as well. And then they explained, when I was reading, because he held the cast together. I was like, yeah, no, I got it. But he was in an interesting transition period where Dana Carvey and Mike Myers and Lovitz and the guys that he kind of came in with were leaving. And then the new cast was coming out. And so I should have said this when I mentioned the Jay Leno thing. So Jay Leno says, you want to come, I'm taking over for Carson, you want to be my sidekick. At the same time, SNL was convincing him to come back, and I guess when he kind of he said he felt like the old guy that stayed in high school too long. But then when he saw guys like Norm, Sandler, Chris Rock, Chris Farley, it seemed like I saw a couple things with him and Chris Farley. It seemed like they were fairly close.
Yeah.
So I think he just liked that new group of guys and almost being their mentor in a way in the early years of them being there. So, like I said, professionally, Phil Hartman, A's across the board for this guy. But his love life, not so great. So where do we go now, Matt?
Bryn had a bit of a drug problem.
For sure.
And in 97, she... after being clean, relapsed.
Yes. And so there's a lot of controversy with this.
It's when her children were 5 years old.
I forget. I might go out of order, Matt. I apologize.
That's fine.
But her... so she relapsed in 97, and there's a lot of drama around this because they say that it was at a Christmas party for NewsRadio. I think it was a Christmas party or some gathering of the NewsRadio cast. And evidently... Andy Dick gave her cocaine. Legend has it. Some people say that's not true. And it's funny. Let's just hear Andy Dick talk about it, and you decide whether or not he did.
Sounds accurate.
That's fine. I love it.
Yeah.
And
see, I think what's going on.
Oh, here's what. You can put this on YouTube.
Tom Green.
Yeah.
Whether I gave Phil Hartman's wife cocaine, which I don't know if I did or not. It's
pause.
It would be
I'd say we got our answer probably.
Well, he was so coked out, he probably actually does not know.
No, I believe. I just think it's funny that he's like, well, maybe I have no idea.
I don't know. I gave everyone cocaine that night.
That's how Andy Dick is like. If you don't, for you kids out there, if you don't know Andy Dick, he is like a Hall of Fame level Hollywood fuck up. he was always all kinds of banged up, and I know he was on that show Love. The Judd Apatow Netflix show. It seemed like he was doing well on that. I've heard him in some interviews. It seems like he's doing better. I don't know. He's always on and off. I have no idea.
That's a great show.
But I'm curious what you guys think of his explanation of this. And I find Tom Green's reaction kind of funny.
Whether I gave Phil Hartman's wife cocaine, which I don't know if I did or not, it would be like if I died tonight because I asked you for coke, and you said, yeah, I happen to have some that my friend gave me. Yeah, here, go, do it. And you didn't know I had a problem. Or you're like, oh, he must always do it. It's like his vitamin C. It's vitamin to him. He needs it. And then you give it to him, but I die. Would you think you killed me?
Can I say no comment? I don't know. No, I guess not. No, I wouldn't
think you killed me.
I've never done
Tom Green is great.
I'm from Ottawa, I think
we're good. Tom Green's the greatest. By the way, we'll probably do a Tom Green episode at some point. He's totally kind of underrated as well.
Can you imagine? I feel like just being around Andy Dick would be uncomfortable on its own.
Yeah.
And then having him say something like that to you,
He's like, right, I didn't kill her. Right?
An interview back then of Tom Green and Andy Dick would just be like headache inducing.
Oh my God.
Now, in Andy Dick's defense, the story is that he gave her coke that night and she relapsed.
Started a
now,
spiral.
Whether or not that's true, first of all, I don't know if Andy Dick knew she had a drug problem. Also, based on Andy Dick's behavior, I don't know that he's incredibly responsible.
No, I think we can definitively say that he is not responsible.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure he was passing out 8 balls every room he went into.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know. I gave everyone coke that night.
The other important thing to note is he didn't give her coke and then she died. Like, that's not what happened.
That's not what happened.
So just also keep that in mind. I'm trying to think. Matt, have you listened to these clips? Obviously, you cut them up, right?
Yeah. So this is the Lovitz and Andy Dick.
I'm gonna let you decide here. Do we play this before or after we go through the whole story?
I think we play this after.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good call. So,
and then there's still the Rogan and Dave Foley clip too.
Yes. Yeah. So, I'm gonna try and recap this story as best I can from everything I read and watched about it. Basically, Bryn Hartman went out to dinner with a friend of hers. Oh, you know what? Let me backtrack. Because this friend produced the show, remember Third Rock from the Sun?
Yes.
John Lithgow?
Yes.
So this lady produced Third Rock from the Sun. Bryn was an extra on that, which is important to note because, excuse me, imagine if I died explaining this story. Throughout Phil Hartman's career, when he met Bryn, she was a swimsuit model, a very lovely woman, and an aspiring actress. Now, aspiring is an important word there because apparently she always wanted like acting roles, and she would hound Phil to get him to get her acting roles.
Yeah.
And the best part is, I can't remember if it was Rogan or someone else I heard explain this story, and like Phil would come home and she'd be like, did you ask like NewsRadio about this role? And he'd be like, oh, I forgot. which is a great tell for like, I don't want you on this fucking show. So she would always hound him about acting roles. So anyways, she's out to dinner with this woman who produces Third Rock from the Sun. And the woman described it as a very normal dinner. She was in good spirits. I don't think she drank at that dinner, if I'm correct. I can't remember exactly. But the woman reported no odd behavior. Then Bryn left that dinner and went to a man named, I believe, Ron Douglas, if I'm not mistaken. She went to Ron Douglas's house. And based on the story, I was kind of under the assumption maybe she was having an affair with this Ron Douglas. It's hard to say. Like, she went to his house and started complaining about Phil Hartman and complaining about what a mopey is and this and that. Now, to backtrack again, his second wife, when they got divorced, she stated that Phil was reclusive and claimed some kind of infidelity. So, to Bryn's credit, Phil did have a bit of a wandering eye, which he acknowledged in his life, and was also very reclusive when he was at home. Like, he would kind of, like, at work, he would fall into these characters and become these characters, but at home, he was a much, darker, quieter guy. So she was complaining about Phil to this Ron Douglas guy, and she was getting all kinds of hopped up. She was doing lines of blow, as the great Judge Joe Brown would say. And then she went back, all hopped up to her home, where her children were sleeping upstairs, and her and Phil get into an argument. And then I guess they're going back and forth at each other, and as Phil would often do, he left the argument and said, I'm sick of this, I'm just going to bed. And he went to bed and fell asleep. Bryn proceeded to do more cocaine and got all kinds of hopped up and went to their gun cabinet and walked into the bedroom and shot Phil 3 times in the chest, neck, and head. Then put down the gun, left, and later both children were sleeping upstairs, and one said that he mistook it. Like he heard the noises and thought it was just doors slamming. Like it seemed like his parents were just arguing again and the doors were slamming. So Bryn went back to this Ron Douglas's house. And this is the one part that made me think maybe I was wrong about a potential affair. Because she starts telling Ron Douglas, I killed Phil. I don't know what to do. Like she was in, a mess about it, obviously, as you can imagine. She was like, what the fuck did I do? She was coked up and kind of coming down and realized what had happened. And so Ron Douglas doesn't believe her. He says, I'm going to go back with you to the house. We'll figure this out. He goes into the home. He finds Phil laying there dead and calls the police. While he's calling the police, Bryn runs into the room that Phil is in, locks herself in there. Police come. They get the kids out of the house. They get this Ron Douglas character out of the house. And then they're trying to get Bryn out of the room. And as they're doing that, they hear a gunshot. They knock down the door, and now Bryn has shot herself laying next to Phil Hartman. So a wildly sad end for the great Phil Hartman. It's like it's truly one of the most tragic stories in comedy history. I can't even think of another murder to that magnitude, really. I'm racking my brain trying to think of one off the top of my head, and I can't.
Comedy.
Yeah, so very sad. And let's hear, what do you think?
Actually,
Rogan and Dave Foley, probably?
It depends. Do you consider the Naked Gun movies comedies?
I do.
That's a pretty gruesome murder associated with those.
He was not the victim. Well, in some ways he was, but
well, he's trying to find a real killer.
He was wrongly persecuted.
Let's go with the Rogan one first.
Yeah, so let's hear Rogan and Dave Foley, two of his cast members from NewsRadio, talk about their marriage.
It's like, he loved it. He learned to fly a plane. He learned to sail a boat. He was one of those guys,
Yeah.
He's
if only he had learned to duck.
Yeah, well, not even. If he had learned to just separate from fucking crazy people. I know. Had some, we all did, I think, had talks with him many times about divorce. You got to get out of that, man.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where we would have these parties. I mean, Paul had one party once, and I remember we were all at this bar somewhere, and Phil showed up with the wife, and she just was saying the creepiest shit and insulting him, and talking about how she likes pickup trucks because they remind her of boys that she used to bang back when she was younger, and just torturing him. Just torturing him, talking about, oh, well, you're not Phil. Phil's too old. And just
but saying, didn't he have women thrown on him all the time? It seems like if he was that miserable that Phil. He would have just...
It doesn't matter, man. When you have children with somebody, you're inexorably attached forever.
And Phil was, the thought of being separated from his kids, and I understand because at the time I was separated from my kids.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely see where he was coming from. He didn't want a divorce. He thought his wife, with all her flaws, was still very good to the kids, and and he felt like he could work it out. And then he really got into pot. That was his thing. He would just get blazed.
Yeah, I always love. Yeah, he'd be sitting in his Mercedes in this parking space with his one hitter.
Yeah, baked to the gills.
Getting stoned, and you weren't smoking weed at the time. Can you imagine smoking weed with Phil Hartman?
Yeah, you barely.
That'd be great.
I didn't do anything. I would just get drunk. That's all I would do.
I can't imagine Phil Hartman getting... I wouldn't picture him as a weed guy, but that would be so awesome.
It's so funny.
I just want to hear what his giggles sound like.
Yeah, exactly. So, obviously, they're Bryn, a troubled woman, and I've heard Rogan tell that story multiple times, and he always tells it the same way, where she would talk about, trucks and guys she fucked in that, right in front of... just completely trying to disrespect him and put him down. And obviously she has her mental issues for sure, and she, drug problems and things like that. So you can, sympathize with that to a point, I guess. But
homicide.
But it's fucking crazy, and it's sad. This is the worst example. We talked about Louis Anderson not being able to come out because he wants to keep up the image of a family man. This is the most tragic example of a guy trying to keep up the image of a family man. He's like, I can't get divorced. I'm thought of as this family guy, family-oriented guy. I can't get a divorce, and it ultimately cost him his fucking life. It's such an insane thing. I'm even trying to joke about it now, and it's hard to because it's just a sad story,
That was way. We wish he learned how to duck. I was like, Jesus.
Right?
I liked it. Though.
It's fucking funny. It's tragedy plus time equals comedy, right?
Yeah.
But you do hear also, Rogan mentions at the beginning of that clip, I guess he, as men often do when they don't want to go home necessarily, he picked up a lot of hobbies. Like he learned to fly, I guess at NewsRadio in his office or whatever, his trail, whatever it is, at NewsRadio. He had like a flight simulator. So he learned to fly. Like I think Rogan said he took him out once flying.
That's cool.
He was a big sailor, things like that. So he found a lot of other interests. Probably because he didn't want to head home too early.
Different ways to travel far away.
Yeah, he flew a spaceship a few times. Whatever would take him out of the galaxy.
A submarine.
It's like, do you like water? No. All right, sailing it is.
So yeah, obviously that's very sad. But another beef. So do we have any clips before we get to the Lovitz Andy Dick thing?
No, this is it.
Okay. So the grand finale here, folks. It doesn't just end when Phil Hartman's life ended. Obviously, there were a lot of great tributes on SNL and award shows around that time, things like that. The Simpsons dedicated I think posthumously his last episode on The Simpsons came out, and they dedicated it to Phil Hartman. Very sad.
Yeah.
And then years later, so like I said, Andy Dick was kind of always blamed for this, which is not fair.
No.
It's not. It's really not fair. I mean,
Not at all.
I'll even say maybe he probably got her back on coke for all I know. But that's not, no one thinks, well, if I give her this coke, even if he did it maliciously, thinking like, I know she's an addict, but we're having fun.
If I give her this coke a year from now, she's gonna blow his brains out.
And legit, he said this was, he goes, people act like this was like that night. It was 6 months later.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Yeah. So it's really not fair that Andy Dick got that blame, even though I don't know that Andy Dick's necessarily a great guy. But one of the people that really blamed Andy Dick for the death was John Lovitz. And I didn't include these clips because it's just kind of gross to hear John Lovitz cry. I don't know. There's something about him that's not a great crier. But like I heard him on Dennis Miller at another award show there are a couple of clips of like he brings up Phil Hartman and Dennis Miller's asking him about Phil Hartman, and it seemed like Dennis Miller kind of thinks it's going to be like fun remembering Phil Hartman.
Yeah.
And Lovitz like broke down and started crying. So like he obviously cared about this guy a lot. They started together in comedy. Lovitz replaced Phil Hartman on NewsRadio, which I can only imagine. Shame on me. I should have found him talking about that because I imagine that was a tough decision. But if you love this guy so much, it's like, do I replace him? Like, am I honoring him by taking the role, or am I doing it a disservice? Because let's face it, John Lovitz was not as good as Phil Hartman.
No.
So I imagine that was very tough on him. But
I do like John Lovitz, though. I do think he's funny.
He has his moments.
He does.
He has his moments. I liked him on Seinfeld.
Yeah, he was great in Seinfeld.
Yeah, Jack.
He was great in like The Wedding Singer and that like smarmy character too. And Rat Race.
I'm reaping all the benefits.
Yeah. And that movie Rat Race that nobody fucking saw, that was great. He was great in that too.
Yeah, that I don't know.
Oh, he was awesome in that.
Yeah, he's with his family.
Yeah. $1.
My favorite. John Lovitz opened up a comedy club. I think it's called John Lovitz's Comedy Club or something like that. And Norm was talking about this with someone on Norm Macdonald Live. I can't think of maybe David Spade or something. And he goes, yeah, that's normal. You start stand up when you're 60. You're just shitting all over Lovitz for doing stand up. So, Lovitz gets into stand up and all of that. I want to say this is at the Laugh Factory around 2006. But I found the best telling of this story was, you guys know the comedian Godfrey? Not Gilbert Godfrey. Godfrey. Yeah. So Godfrey was hosting, I think the Laugh Factory or wherever it was on this night. And take it away. Let's hear him tell it.
So one day I'm on stage in L.A. And in L.A., everybody's celebrity happy. So Andy calls me from the back. Godfrey, I want to go up. So I'm thinking, and this is John Lovitz's show, his comedy night. And so I'm hosting. I'm like, hey, ladies and gentlemen, because that's what you do in L.A., right? You bring up a celebrity.
Yeah.
We have a special guest coming in here. let's give it up to Mr. Andy Dick. Everyone's like, oh, Andy Dick.
Right.
He goes up, he's fucking sucking ass. And John Lovitz is in the back, who's, John is really mellow guy. John's in the back going, I go, what the fuck, what? He goes, what the fuck? He's losing his shit. I go, John, I've never seen John like this. Yeah. So Andy Dick's up there going, yeah, motherfuckers, and and we're like, yo, get this motherfucker off. And so I had to wait. Good night. I'm like, shit. And I run back up. Hey, Andy Dick, everybody. Ooh. And John Lovitz is slamming Andy Dick against the wall in the lobby. There's a fight and John Lovitz going like, you motherfucker! Trying to whoop his ass.
So John Lovitz tried to beat the shit out of Andy Dick. And then I guess he had to be like pulled off of him. And then Godfrey didn't know. So the whole thing is Godfrey didn't know they had this beef.
It's an unbelievable image.
That's hilarious.
Like, I don't know if Godfrey even knew the story about Andy Dick with Hartman's wife or any of that. He just was bringing up a celebrity. And then later he's talking to John Lovitz, and I guess Lovitz goes, I wanted to kill him. Like, this is John Lovitz's voice.
The only way that fight could be more effeminate is if Louis Anderson joined in.
Boys!
Just a slap fight.
So I thought that was a great way to end this Phil Hartman show with a little levity, for Christ's sake.
I don't know how, but this one was definitely more upbeat ending than the last one.
The last one was
way more.
Well, that's why I wanted to save this clip for the end, not to save it on end it on a murder suicide.
Yeah.
We didn't find out that Phil Hartman was a posthumous scumbag.
True.
That's true. Yeah,
true.
Yeah, right. No, his kids weren't his. So.
Yeah, right.
No, I'm kidding, of course.
It was Louis Anderson's kids.
There's someone else's now.
So Phil Hartman,
the states.
Yeah. Well, they're like my age, I guess. So they're adults.
Yeah.
So Phil Hartman, truly one of the greats, one of the most underrated.
Yeah.
And again, to think of what his career would have been, because he was entering the phase where like he was now supposed to be that age. He was like a 50-year-old guy. Yeah. And that I think he would have really thrived, but unfortunately we'll never know. But rest in peace, Phil Hartman, and on to the next one as we go through the history of comedy here on Why You Laughing. Very good show is where you can find Craig and Mike and all of their hijinks, as well as Craig's on the Blind Mike Project. Don't forget to subscribe there. Patreon.com/blindmike. Get one of these fine, comfy hoodies. Got Why You Laughing and Blind Mike merch in our link tree and everything. So it's on Teespring, so find that somewhere. And Vaulted Podcasts here in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. If you want to do some recording, if you're in the area, you need a studio, need to film something, what have you, Matt from Rhode Island will hook you up. So check out vaultedpodcastsri.com or just hit up Matt from RI on Twitter, and he'll hook you up. Goodbye, everybody.